people, just like you were doing before I interrupted. If anyone needs to go to the restroom, I think everybody knows where they are in the back to my left. Now for our standard disclaimer. ASF is a diverse organization with members who represent a wide range of opinions. The speakers who present at our big meetings do not necessarily reflect the views of ASF or its individual members. Because we are a 501c3 organization, ASF cannot directly support public candidates for public office. But we can advocate for causes such as separation of church and state, scientific literacy, societal progress, and truthful communication. That said, we have Byrne Bradley, who will deliver both our free thought of the day and our skeptical sidebar today. Doing double pitching, right? Right. Would everyone please give a warm welcome to Byrne Bradley?
Thank you. Sometimes the electronics get the better of me. Well, the skeptical sidebar of the day involves a quote that's been attributed to Mark Twain.
Here's what I found.
Mark Twain, several newspapers, in fact, probably a great number of newspapers in the United States were reporting on his long-term illness and either his imminent death or his actual death. At the time, he was living in London, and it came as a great surprise to him that he died. But the London-based reporter for the New York Journal sent him a note, a hand-delivered note, and Twain sent a hand-delivered note back. The quote attributed to him generally is, "Rumors of my death have been highly exaggerated." His own biographer wrote that he replied, "Rumors of my death are a high exaggeration." But we have, in his own handwriting, the note that he actually sent back to the Journal reporter in London. And he says, "James Ross Clemens, a cousin of mine, was seriously ill 2 or 3 weeks ago in London, but is well now. The report of my illness grew out of his illness. The report of my death was an exaggeration." Mark Twain. I love that we can't ever take an honest quote for something that's good enough. Someone had to come along and make it funny. And generally that's him, but not in this case. So that is our correction of a skeptical belief. The free thought is this: if it's icing up outside, and you know it is, when you get in your car, you need to worry a little bit about that. You need to be concerned about that. You need to know that if you get on this road, you're probably not going to finish being on this road. You're going to end up in a ditch somewhere. This is one of the first roads they close in flood and ice. However, if you're sitting at home and worried to death about the ice on the trees and the ice on the road and everything else, you're wasting time. And our free thought of the day is, worry is a misuse of imagination. Thanks.
Great job, Byrne. So our monthly meeting offers you the chance to have your voice be heard. Talk to us if you'd like to deliver the free thought of the day. If you'd like to have a skeptical sidebar, something you found out is misleading or untrue. I'm sure there's not that many things out there in these days of the internet. I mean, it's all true, right? Otherwise it wouldn't be on the internet. But we've also got openings for if you want to tell a member story, some story about your life and how free thought has intersected with your life, or just, a story that helps us get to know each other better on a deeper level. We also have openings for speakers, just like our speaker today, Allie Noland. If you are a person who is working on something interesting in activism, science, technology, whatever, we might be interested in hearing from you. Okay, we probably are. Now, our speaker for today is Allie Noland. Allie has a distinguished legal career and a proven record as a fierce advocate for education and public school students. She advocated for legislation to benefit public schools even before joining the Little Rock School Board once it was returned to local control. She will analyze the changes in the LEARNS Act and how that will change Arkansas education policy, and explain the lawsuit she filed to prevent the act from being implemented. And she'll talk to us about the efforts of so many volunteers all across the state to collect signatures to repeal the law. Could I get a very warm welcome for our distinguished guest, Allie Noland.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. Okay, thank you. I'm Allie Noland. I am a Little Rock School District school board member and a local attorney here in Little Rock. I will tell you, my 8-year-old son, Brady, is going to be arriving and getting dropped off. So in a moment, I'm going to have to do mom duties and get him settled while we're talking. Today is his birthday, so I'm going to have to wish him happy birthday.
We can sing it.
Yeah, let's do that. So I'm here to cover, I have 1 page of notes, but this is going to cover a lot. We're going to talk about the LEARNS Act. We're going to talk about the lawsuit, the efforts to repeal the LEARNS Act through the petition process, the current fight over AP African American history, and what's next for the future. So I'm going to go kind of fast, and if you have questions, you're actually welcome. I know there will be questions at the end, but if I am going too fast or there's something where people are getting lost, feel free to speak up and ask me. I mean, I'd rather have dialogue than just stand up here and lecture at you. So I will just start generally with the LEARNS Act itself. The first thing to note about it is the unusual process by which it was passed. Most pieces of legislation, first of all, most pieces of legislation into bills that cover generally one topic or one big change. This was a giant omnibus bill. It was 145 pages long, and it makes so many changes. It's hard for me to even, succinctly make notes about what it actually does because it is so broad. And so that's the first thing to note, is that you had one bill that was going to get an up or down, pass, fail vote, and there were some parts of it that people supported and some parts that they didn't, and it made it harder to get a clear vote on things like vouchers and teacher raises and other things because they were all lumped in together. You were having to decide it all together. The other part of the process that was unusual is how fast it went. From the introduction, the first time the text was released, to the time that it was finally formally passed and sent to the governor's desk, was right at about 2 weeks, which is extremely fast for a piece of legislation to make it through the legislative process. It might have just been a day or two over 2 weeks, but we're talking, shy of 3 weeks here in this process. That is unheard of in Arkansas. There was a lot of speculation and complaint that the reason it went so fast was it made it harder for people to pick apart the 145 pages, to recognize and realize the parts that were going to cause problems, to come to the legislature, make their voices heard, and really try to advocate for changes, instead of going through that process, which has been the norm in the past. It was very quickly passed. 1 day of hearings in the House committee, passed. 1 day of hearings in the Senate committee, passed. It was just, I don't want to use the phrase rubber stamped, but that is very much what it felt like. I will also say that the other part, and this isn't This has become the norm somewhat, but it is a bit of a departure from the recent past in Arkansas, was just the level of vitriol that went along with the passage of this bill. We had superintendents from several school districts show up at the first committee meeting and testify, you know, this part is going to hurt our school district, this part is too expensive, we can't afford that, you know, substantive challenges to what was in the bill. And we had sitting legislators publicly accuse them of lying, you know, call them liars in the press. It became very nasty very fast. And it made it much harder to really focus in on the specifics of the substance, things like teacher raises and how those would be funded, when there are, you know, just accusations that the facts are not correct. That we've all talked about post-truth and post-facts in our political environment, and that's kind of where we were on this. So what does the bill actually do? What are the parts that we want to talk about? I will start with the vouchers because that's probably the biggest part that most people have heard about and know about for the LEARNS Act. This bill created a scheme to fund private education with taxpayer money. So it's called Education Freedom Accounts, and it would be 90% of what the state pays in per student public school funding. So what that actually amounts to is a little over $6,000 annually per student who gets one of these education freedom accounts. They would then be able to use it for approved private schools or vendors. You know, for example, if they are a homeschool family, they could use it to purchase curriculum from an approved vendor, something like that. One thing, you know, I want to be really fair in assessing what it does. Some of the original concerns that were floated were things like, well, if you send the check directly to the family, wouldn't we be encouraging people to keep their kids out of public school just to receive that check? So they addressed that, and instead you have to, the money flows to an approved vendor. It's not a check to the parent. What are some of the arguments for the vouchers and some of the arguments against? The argument that is most often used in favor of a voucher scheme like this is that it would provide poor students with the same opportunities that rich people already have to go select other educational offerings other than just the public school system. So private school, homeschool, things like that. And there has been a lot of language about students being trapped in failing public schools and not having the opportunity to go to an elite private school because of the financial feasibility of that for those families. Well, does this actually accomplish that goal? That's the argument that's been used to support it. Does this actually do it? I would very strongly say no, it does not. And here are some of the reasons why. First, that amount. The voucher is about a little over $6,000. Have y'all looked at tuition at PA or Episcopal or some of those? High school tuition right now at PA and Episcopal is $17,000. Plus, transportation is extra if you need transportation, uniforms, books, extracurriculars. So in reality, you're looking at close to $20,000 per student per year to attend some of these private institutions. That $6,000 voucher does not really make that accessible to a family living, you know, near or at poverty. That is, who is that actually benefiting? That is benefiting the families that have an extra $10,000 or so laying around each year to be able to afford the private schools. So the benefit is not flowing to the people that the politicians are claiming will benefit from these programs. And in fact, multiple studies of other voucher programs around the country have shown that over 2/3, and in some cases, in some states, more than 80% of voucher recipients are families that have no record of ever attending public schools and were, in fact, already enrolled in private schools. They are simply getting a discount or a kickback to be able to afford that tuition. And so the argument that this is really helping poor children trapped in failing public schools escape public schools just doesn't play out. And we have actually gotten the first glimpses of data here in Arkansas. There were some FOIA requests to look at who has applied and received vouchers here. And it showed that only about 1% of voucher recipients in Arkansas so far are students who are transferring out of a school labeled D or F, a D or F school. So what else does the voucher program not actually do? Well, it doesn't cover a lot of things that families need. It doesn't cover transportation. In particular, it doesn't cover services for students with special needs or disabilities. And in fact, one big talking point in favor of vouchers, I was there for all the committee testimony, by far one of the most overwhelming talking points was, my child has special needs, these needs weren't being met in the public schools, being able to go to this private school will be a lifesaver for our family. That was often what was presented. But under federal law, public school districts are required by law to provide services for students with disabilities and special needs. And there are enforcement mechanisms and there are consequences if the public schools do not provide those things. We are not perfect, and in fact, this has been a huge challenge. Filling special education teacher roles has been very hard lately. But there is a legal requirement and there's an enforcement. Private schools, even under this voucher plan, are not required at all to provide those services. There is no requirement. And in fact, when Representative Denise Garner questioned some of the private school owners who were testifying in favor of the vouchers about whether their school offered these services, every one of them responded, well, we're just not equipped to help those students. We really just can't, we need to let them be in a situation where they can get the help they need and we're not equipped to do that. But the problem is we're funding a system where some schools are allowed to say that, and many schools are not allowed to say that. And we're presenting it as a way to help these students when in fact there's no requirement that that help be provided at all. All right, other problems, I'll just go kind of quickly down this list. Admissions, if you think about it, if you were running a private school and you were choosing who to admit and who not to admit, we can all imagine truly, dark or nefarious selection. So if we're talking about race or different ways to discriminate, but there are other more subtle things. Maybe you have an academic requirement and you only admit students who are the highest performing students. All of a sudden, we are creating a system where we have schools that are publicly funded that are deeply unequal in terms of who is allowed to attend, who gets in, all of those things. And we will then use the data from this program and they will say, look at how great this voucher is. Our students that accepted the voucher are performing so well. That's because those are the only students the school admitted. They didn't admit the other students. The other things to keep in mind are geographic availability. If you look at, much of Arkansas, there is no private school within 75 miles or more. There are other states, Missouri is one in particular, that you can look at. There are deserts where vouchers are being presented as great options, but in reality, for small rural communities, there are no private options, even if a voucher was something that they were interested in accepting. Huge cost. This is a big one. So this is often presented as money being pulled from the public school and sent to the private schools through the vouchers. That's, at least in Arkansas right now, not exactly true, not exactly how it would work. So the public schools would lose money as they lost enrollment. If our funding comes based on per student enrollment numbers. So if we lose a significant percentage of our enrollment, we lose funding. That is true. It also concentrates the population of students we are serving in terms of students with disabilities, students with trauma, or other special needs. It makes it often more expensive because we can educate every student, but there are some students that we have to have more resources to be able to give that student what they need. And when, the easiest to educate students that do not have any of those challenges are siphoned off to a private school, our student population is much more concentrated in terms of how expensive it is to educate those students. So it's not always true that the money is directly flowing from the public school to the private school. We are losing some money through lost enrollment, but the state has created y'all probably heard the governor on the news saying, completely separate pot of money. It's a different funding allocation for these vouchers. It is not coming out of what we currently fund for public education. And that, at first, would seem like a really good, safeguard. Great, we're not taking the education funding and using it. But the problem is that in other states where this has been done, I'll use Arizona, for example, they had a projection that it would cost the state about $65 million to do their voucher scheme. This year, that has come in at $900 million as their estimate for what the state will have to pay if it honors the vouchers that it has promised to all these families. Every state that has done this, the estimates have been far below what the actual cost has ended up being to the state. And even though we have separate pots of money right now for public education and this voucher scheme, when that demand grows so much, all of a sudden our lawmakers are going to have to make choices about how to allocate that money. And so the overall pot of money is not growing. We're just spending more of it on the families that were frankly already in private school to begin with. All right. In studies of other programs, I hit on the fact that in many of these studies, 2/3 to 80% were already families that were in private school. There's another, Brookings did a survey of 4 studies in 4 different states of 4 different voucher programs. And they found that where students did transfer from the public school system to the private school system using vouchers, their test scores declined. In all 4 states, under all 4 programs. We don't know exactly why. I can't, that's just what the data is showing, that it isn't, it is billed as this way to help students improve, and it's not actually showing that it does that. All right, so that is the voucher part of the LEARNS Act. That is not the only thing that it does. One thing it did was it created teacher raises. And the teacher raises, I'll go more quickly through this. The problem with this, it was great to raise teacher pay. We also had a separate bill that would have raised teacher pay and fully funded it. This scheme to raise teacher pay raised starting teacher pay, and then it's to $50,000, which is great. That is wonderful. And then it said, and you get a $2,000 bonus if you were already above $50,000. So if you think about it, if you are a school district and you have a pay scale, imagine a big chart with a grid on it, and in one corner, the top corner up here, it's going to be the teachers that have the least experience and the lowest amount of education, and they are going to be the lowest paid teachers coming in. They've got, maybe they aren't even licensed yet, they're straight out of school, they don't have all of those qualifications. That is what got raised to $50,000. But in the past, we had a state pay scale that recognized that as you increase years of experience or as you increase educational attainment, that pay should go up. And so on that chart, as you went down through the years of experience or across based on education, the pay was incrementally increased to recognize that. Now, in many districts in Arkansas, you are seeing 50, 50, 50, 50, 50, 50, 50, 50, 50 across the board, with maybe a few very experienced, very highly educated teachers getting 52 or 54. It is a compression and flattening of the pay scale that no longer recognizes and compensates for years of experience or educational attainment in the way that we have in the past. many districts, like Little Rock School District, want to continue to compensate for those things. And so we want to start teacher pay at $50,000, that's great, and then keep those stair steps above that, right? The only way we can do that is if we come up with the additional money. And in some districts it's 7 million, in some it's 10, in some it's 12 million. In the past, the state built the staircase, and districts, if they wanted to be competitive, they paid for a little cushion on top of that to say, our district pays a little more. Now the state is creating a flat, floor, and if you want that staircase, you build it yourself. And that is going to lead to extreme inequality between districts in terms of what they can pay for their teachers. The law also repealed the Teacher Fair Dismissal Act and Public Employee Fair Hearing Act. It basically made it much easier to fire teachers without due process, and made it much harder. Let me talk about exactly how that works. Normally, under those laws, you would have to inform a teacher of what the issue is, what the complaint is. Give them a plan for how to improve it. Give them an opportunity to improve it. And then, if it is not fixed, then you have a process of decisions and appeals that can ultimately result in termination, and it's often appealed to the school board, and the school board has to vote. Now, does that mean that prior to this decision, we could not fire bad teachers? Because that's the talking point that is used that said we had to get rid of this law. That is not what it means. I will tell you, I've been on the school board for 3 years. Every month we have multiple hearings where we terminate employees. It happens all the time because an employee is not, it is not beneficial to the district to continue to employ that person in our schools. It is really hard, but we do it, and hard personally, hard emotionally. What does it take to do it? It takes administrators at the school level who do their job, that document, that inform the person. If you have an administrator that is scared to make anyone angry, they will give great reviews all the way through the year and not tell any teacher that they have a problem that they need to work on. But if you have good administrators, they will say, this is a problem, I need you to address it. If it's not getting addressed, they'll start the formal process, give them an improvement plan. That's not fun, but that's how we have, better education. That's how we provide what we need to in the schools. And that is something that we, and I think every other district in the state, has worked on in terms of training our administrators to really use that process so that we do make the changes we need to make. So we did not actually have to eliminate teachers' due process rights to be able to make sure that we're providing what we need to for our students. I will also add just a little side note. I am very active on Twitter and social media, and when this first came out, I tweeted that if the state passed this law, that districts, including LRSD, could simply write into our own policies a due process that would be used to discipline and terminate teachers. And the state revised the Learns bill and said you cannot provide teachers with any more rights than are guaranteed under state law. So, what does that mean? Well, in Little Rock School District, we had anti-discrimination policies. We can't have that because it's more rights than what are guaranteed under state law. There are lots of ways that little provision is so much broader than I think the drafters ever intended or understood it to be. Real quickly, other things that it does. It allows a charter district to take over a public school district if the public school district is, quote unquote, failing or struggling. We have seen that in Marvel Lane School District. The issue here, and I'm not unbiased on this. We have seen a Little Rock School District takeover that did not improve our schools. I don't personally believe that state takeovers for academic struggles work. They don't work nationwide. That's because most of our academic struggles stem from poverty and the associated trauma and things that students bring to the classroom. Unless the state takeover comes with additional resources to address those problems, they are not going to do any better than the public school district was doing in educating those students. And that's what we've seen. And so state takeovers have become fairly unpopular. They blow back on the state. They're difficult for the state. So what did they do? They said, well, we're going to outsource it to charter school companies, and we're going to pay them out of the district finances to run the district. So in Marvel Lane School District, they took over the district, they dissolved the school board, and they entered into an agreement with a charter school company, one that is not, in terms of their academic grade that the state assigns for how well they're doing, it's not that much higher than Marvel Lane School District. It has its own struggles. And they handed it off. That was part of what the lawsuit was about, and I'll talk about that shortly, but that's part of what the LEARNS Act allows now, is charter takeovers of public school districts. And there's a ban on indoctrination and critical race theory. That is not happening. I don't know how to argue against, craziness sometimes. The definitions in the law are extremely vague. We are having a fight right now about AP African American Studies. I think the most clear point I can make to you is that even after reviewing this course for months, the state cannot point to a single example of indoctrination or critical race theory in the course, and yet we are still fighting about whether it is indoctrination and critical race theory. That is a political stunt. That's all. That is a political stunt to use that phrase and to lob that accusation at our teachers, not our schools, without any real evidence that that is occurring. Other things in the bill, real quick. Course choice. Public schools are now required to pay for students to take courses if that course is not offered at the school, and we are required to provide advertising for those courses. That may sound like, great, let's give the opportunity for the student to take a course. If your high school doesn't offer Latin, you can go take Latin somewhere else now and get credit, and the school will pay for it. But how this will really work is that the student is going to get a flyer for Super Mario Brothers Math or something like that looks so much better than what is offered at school. And we are now required by law to pay up to 1/6 of our per student foundation funding for that student to take that course. Students take a lot more than 6 courses in high school, so we could actually it could financially really hurt districts if this takes off in that way. And then finally, there are lots of provisions in the law that apply only to public schools. So for example, there's a new requirement, 75 hours of community service to graduate from high school. That starts this year, so our freshmen are required to get 15 hours of community service this year. That is not applicable to other publicly funded schools at this point, which include the students taking vouchers to go to private schools. It's only applicable to public schools. Third graders who are not reading at grade level are required to be held back. Now, again, not applicable if you are taking a voucher and going to a private school, but applies to the public school system. I will also tell you, just as a, I know my zone that I serve in Little Rock, and if we told a lot of those families, your student is not reading at grade level right now and we have to hold them back, they would say, bye, we're heading down the street to this other school where that doesn't have to happen. To me, this seems very much as a mechanism to help fuel the vouchers and fuel the move to private schools. That's my take. I will also say there is data. While third grade reading is critical, and we absolutely have to address that, there isn't data supporting that holding students back is the right answer to fix it. So that is a general overview of what the law does. Now, I have left out, I should say, there are some parts in there that are positive. They hired literacy coaches, the teacher raises, there's some school safety things, which I don't 100% agree with the approach they're taking, but there are things in there that are positive. It's all lumped together. So that's what the law does. It was immediately used for this transformation contract over the Marvel Lane School District. That's the charter takeover. And that is how I got involved as an attorney, because I actually got a call from a couple of parents in Marvel Lane School District The state board called a meeting on a Friday, so this was Thursday. They had less than 24 hours notice. These are parents that live in Marvel, and they were, upset. They said, we don't want this takeover. We don't like this charter school. We don't like the people they brought in. We haven't seen the contract. At that point, it had not been released to the public. Can you help us try to do something? I happen to know at that point, I had knowledge that had not been shared publicly, that the state had passed a lot of these bills, including LEARNs, with a single roll call vote when it passed. So it would say, call the roll. They would call the roll, and then they would use that as passage of the bill and its attached emergency clause. Emergency clauses allow the law to go into effect immediately, but our Constitution requires that you take a separate vote. It says it. It's spelled out in the Constitution that you have to pass it based on separate vote. And so I kind of had tucked in my back pocket this idea that they didn't take the separate vote. When you match that with a group of parents in Marvel and Elaine who wanted to stop the immediate application, there's grounds to move forward and try to stop it. I also was contacted by this group, Citizens for Arkansas Public Education and Students. Y'all probably heard of them as CAPES. They were the ones that gathered the petition signatures. For them, the validity of the emergency clause mattered a lot, because under the Arkansas Constitution, if there is a valid emergency clause, that law does not go into effect until after the election for the repeal, the referendum election. That would have been November 2024. So if they gathered enough signatures, whether there's an emergency clause or not mattered a lot. So based on those two things, first I contacted the Department of Ed and the State Board immediately on Friday, and I tried to get them not to do the transformation contract because I spelled out that they didn't have authority, the law wasn't effective yet. They didn't listen, so they went ahead and did the contract. They voted to go ahead and do it, and we filed suit in Pulaski County Circuit Court. The only issue in that lawsuit, we made several claims, several causes of action, but the core of each one of those was that the emergency clause was invalid, and so LEARNs was not effective yet. So all of these things that the state was doing, they were not authorized to do. Ultimately, Judge, why am I blanking? Herb Wright issued a temporary restraining order. In that order, what he was relying on in part was the fact that the Marvel Elaine School District had fired all of its contract employees. So we're talking about teachers, all the teachers who are on year-to-year contracts, staff, bus drivers, everything. And they cited one reason in the letter, the contract non-renewal letter, and that was this transformation contract. And they did that at a time before the law would have actually gone into effect without the emergency clause. And so Judge Wright looked at that and said, these people are being harmed, and it is based on the unconstitutional actions of the state, and we're going to stop the implementation of the LEARNs Act just until August 1st, when it would go into effect without an emergency clause. So it was always about the timing. We didn't appeal. The state immediately appealed. It went to the Arkansas Supreme Court, and the Arkansas Supreme Court did not address the substance of the emergency clause issue. All the Arkansas Supreme Court did was say, you didn't show enough harm. So I know this is legal, and I'm kind of in the weeds here, but this is very important. What the Supreme Court actually said is that economic damages, when you're harmed financially, those are things that usually you can have a remedy for at the end of the case. You file your lawsuit, you go through the whole process, and you can get money damages at the end, and you can be made whole. And so that isn't the kind of harm that we would put a temporary restraining order in, and that's not appropriate for that type of harm. The problem here is that Arkansas also has a line of cases that says because of sovereign immunity, you can never get money damages from the state. So my clients could never be made whole. They can never get, a money recovery from the state, even if we win on everything, because of that sovereign immunity. So in a very real way, the Arkansas Supreme Court's decision meant that all of us have fewer options to enforce adherence to the Constitution by state government. So when they violate the Constitution, can you go get money damages for that violation? No. Can you go get a temporary restraining order to be able to prevent that violation? No. All that was left was declaratory judgment, where the court just says this is illegal. There's no enforcement mechanism there because they're not charging the state, money or something like that. But we went back to Judge Wright's court, we put on our evidence, we showed unequivocally that they had not passed this in the constitutionally required way, and he did issue that declaratory judgment and said, this is unconstitutional, it wasn't passed appropriately, and that is what is on appeal now. And we have yet to hear from the Supreme Court on that. I mean, I will tell you, I have argued that this case is essentially moot at this point because that August date has passed. CAPES did not gather their signatures, sufficient signatures. And so I don't really want the Arkansas Supreme Court to issue precedent that could further erode our ability to enforce provisions of the Constitution. This particular issue is moot, and we will save that for another day, for another case. All right, so African American Studies. Let's hit that real quick because we're almost out of time. What's happening right now with African American Studies? Several months ago, we've seen what happened in Florida. Governor DeSantis has done much of this in Florida. Here in Arkansas, since taking office, Governor Sanders first issued an executive order that banned CRT and indoctrination in schools. People immediately said, what does that mean? What are you actually talking about? And do we have any examples of that happening? Governor Sanders then the legislature included this language in the LEARNS Act. So now we have the indoctrination and CRT provision in the LEARNS Act. And then she also ordered the Department of Ed to review the content of the AP African American Studies course. That was several months ago, to see if it violated those provisions. On Friday, the Friday before school started, so not 2 days ago, but a week before that, I got a call from a reporter who said, what do you know about them canceling African American Studies? And I said, I don't know what you're talking about. She said, well, I'm getting some calls from some teachers, and they are saying they got calls directly from the Department of Ed telling them the course was canceled. And I told that reporter, that's not how this works. There would be a formal communication from the Department of Ed that went to district administration at the district level. It wouldn't be a phone call to individual teachers. And I thought that was it. And so I reached out to our superintendent. He didn't know what it was about. Saturday morning, an email went out from the Department of Ed. And all it was a screenshot of their computer system, and it said, course canceled, and it had AP African American Studies. No explanation for why, no guidance on what to do about it, nothing. That's a Saturday. They are not answering the phone at the Department of Ed Friday or Saturday. Nobody could get through. Nobody was responding to emails. So districts across the state, we had 6 or 7. I'm still a little unclear on whether it's 6 or 7 districts and or charter schools that were offering this course, had to scramble and figure out, do we keep it on the schedule? What does this mean? We got a little bit of guidance because our superintendent had a personal phone call with the Secretary of Education. A lot of the stuff that the Secretary conveyed did not end up being true. For example, one of the reasons that was provided was that colleges were not providing credit for this course, this AP course, because it's new. Well, we went to the U of A website where it lists AP courses they accept. Very first on the list, alphabetically, is AP African American Studies. More than 200 colleges and universities in the United States have already accepted it for credit and counting. This is not a pilot program in the same sense that it was last year. We offered it last year. Students got credit last year. But last year it was a true pilot because there was no AP exam yet and they couldn't get college credit. This year it has expanded from 60 schools nationwide to I think it was 500 or 600 at this point. There is an exam, there is college credit. It is not a pilot in the same sense. I mean, it is still under development. I think, we need to be clear about that. But for example, we have another course, AP Pre-Calculus, that is also a pilot that is not being treated the same way at all. None of the same concerns have been raised about it. So everyone is scrambling. We're trying to figure out what to do. And on Monday, the Department of Ed puts out a statement and says there are prohibited topics under Arkansas law, and that teaching this course could cause teachers to violate the law, which I will tell you, that made me really mad. That made me really mad, because what that did was threaten teachers. Instead of it being on district administrators and school board members to make up the policy decision about whether we offer this course, that was a direct threat to the teachers. If you teach this course, watch out. We then had several days of meetings in the district to decide what to do. And our district, I think, was the first that announced that we were going to offer it anyway. We are going to keep it on the schedule. We are continuing to have a weighted grade. So AP courses count for 5 points rather than 4 points in the student's GPA. It will appear as an AP course on the transcript. And we will pay for the AP exam. The state pays for all AP exams, but will not pay for this one, based on this decision. So we will pay for the AP exam. Several other districts, and I believe now at this point every other district and charter school that was going to offer the course has made the same decision and is keeping it on the schedule. Governor Sanders went on Fox News on Thursday. I'm kind of getting turned around on my days. It was Wednesday or Thursday. I think it was Thursday. And if there was any question about why this decision was made, all this stuff about college credit or whether the teachers had had a necessary audit, those had been floated. Her statements on Fox News made very clear exactly what this is about. She said this is liberal propaganda. We cannot perpetuate lies to our students, and that this course teaches kids to hate America and hate each other. Those were the phrases she used about why she was not going to teach this course. I will tell you, you should go look at an AP African American Studies classroom at Central High. It is a diverse group of students who are looking at original source documents and are being kind of helped by their teacher, but there's no guidance on what they should think about those documents. They are having debate and discussion. The teacher is there to facilitate that debate and discussion, and they are able to really develop those critical thinking skills about how to evaluate those topics and how to interpret those sources. They're not being taught how to think about our history. They are developing their own conclusions after debate with each other. It is the opposite of indoctrination, and it has been very difficult to fight against something that is, how do you prove a negative? It's kind of like a ghost that you're fighting against. I can show you the course framework. I can let you see inside a classroom, but if you're convinced that teaching a class on AP African American Studies is inherently negative, I don't know how to convince you otherwise. I don't know how to do that. So very quickly, where we are on that, next steps, quite frankly, the ball's kind of back in the state's court. We are offering the course, and to move forward, I'm guessing they are going to have to pinpoint some particular example of indoctrination or CRT that they're challenging in that course. But I will tell you, for the teachers who are teaching this, we have a teacher at Central, Ruthie Walls, who is a foremost subject matter expert on this topic. She spent her summer training other AP African American Studies teachers from around the country how to teach this course. But you can imagine being the target. I mean, that is terrifying for a teacher that have their career and their, potentially their license and all of that targeted by the state for teaching this content. And that is, we will stand by our teachers, we will stand by our students and fight it as much as we can. What's next in terms of next steps? Generally, CAPES did not gather enough signatures, but there are efforts that organization is not done. And there are other organizations across Arkansas that are picking up this banner and are working on things like school board races across the state, legislative races to try to have people in office who care about protecting public education. And I have heard from multiple groups that a potential initiated constitutional amendment, where we would try to put something in the Arkansas Constitution that would safeguard public education in a more substantial way. That those are all things that are on the horizon. So if all of that seemed very negative and hopeless, there are ways to actually concretely get involved and, go work on a campaign or work on one of these initiative campaigns to try to make it better. So that's it. That's what I have. I'm happy to answer questions. Yes.
Well, I have a couple of things, more than two. Debbie and I worked for weeks on this with Kate's to try to get the ballot, get the signatures to get this on the ballot. So anyway, your comment that the money for this is coming out of a different pot makes me think of the Defense Department saying that, okay, when we increase spending on the Army, it's coming out of a different pot than the Navy gets. The pot isn't the pot the taxes
Yes.
that we pay? That's the big pot.
Yeah. So very briefly, Arkansas, after Lakeview, so we have these cases called Lakeview, it established that the state of Arkansas has a constitutional obligation to provide an adequate and equitable public education. What that has meant in practice is two things. One, the legislature has to fund education off the top. Public education has to come off before you start spending on other things. You have to make sure that you can adequately fund it. And two, there is a funding matrix that has been developed for public schools that is supposed to cover everything based on these efficiencies of scale. So as long as you have a district of a certain size, you have classrooms of a certain size, buildings of a certain size, and you're working within those efficiencies, this funding matrix is supposed to cover what it will cost you to educate those students. I can tell you it is insufficient, but it is, at least we have it, and at least it is funded. That is a separate pot, that is a separate allocation than the LEARN's, what word am I blanking on, where they allocate money? What's it? Appropriation, that's the word I'm working for. So the LEARN's appropriation is a separate appropriation than the traditional public school funding appropriation. They are all coming from out of the whole pot of taxpayer money, the money we have available. And anyone who looks at this can say, if we are suddenly opening ourselves up to pay hundreds of millions of dollars in vouchers to mostly families that were otherwise, previously paying private school tuition and were not part of what the state was paying for, that we are extending ourselves to pay for a lot more than we were paying before, and other things are going to have to get squeezed out, whether it comes out of the public school funding or any other public funding. It's got to come from somewhere if you're starting to spend hundreds of millions of dollars on vouchers.
Also, you didn't mention church schools specifically, but I spoke when we were collecting signatures. I talked to a man who was sending two of his sons to Catholic High, and one who had some disabilities to public schools. He was all in favor of the LEARNS Act and wouldn't sign. But anyway, he said that the tuition there for members of the Catholic Church was $5,300, which would be less than this amount. So if you would just convert to Catholicism, then you can send your children there. So this is a big boon for church schools and perhaps schools like, I know I spoke to another man who said that Fellowship Bible was considering starting a new school now that this would be paid for.
A lot of them are going to start new schools. I will say very, very briefly, one thing to consider, I am vehemently pro-public education and am fairly negative about this voucher program, but we also have to recognize that, for example, Catholic High, there was a previous program that paid for students with certain disabilities and things like that. It was the Succeed Scholarship. I didn't like that program either, but they accepted a lot of students under that Succeed Scholarship. That scholarship has gone away and has been replaced by this voucher program. So, for example, Catholic High has been in a position where either they take those vouchers and they become a school that accepts vouchers, or they suddenly have students that were getting this funding to attend their school that are no longer getting, it has put a bunch of schools in a bind like that. Even schools that may not support this program are now, either you put those students out because that Succeed Scholarship is no longer there, or you accept the vouchers and you become part of the program that the LEARNS Act created. The other part that I'll just mention real quickly is that some schools, especially Catholic schools in particular, have offered financial aid for students who couldn't afford the tuition. I had a post on social media just this week of a parent who was very frustrated, who said, I was all about this LEARNS Act, I was so excited about the vouchers, we applied, we got it, and I just got an email from my child's school that said, congratulations, you received the Education Freedom Account voucher. We have decreased your financial aid accordingly. So they are still on the hook for exactly the same amount. The school is just, keeping that financial aid. And one thing that I think needs to be noted, we talked about who uses this. These are often families that were already in private school. What does it actually translate to in real life? The schools increase tuition accordingly. And there is a provision in the law that they say is aimed to prevent that. It says you can't, unreasonably hike up tuition rates in response to the vouchers, but we've already seen it start to happen. We've seen some schools in Arkansas that have already raised tuition the same amount as the voucher the students would be receiving. So anyway, I could talk forever. I'll go on.
I want to thank you for your leadership in our state, and I've thought several times I wish you were our governor. And I certainly would advise you to run. I definitely would vote for you. I'm running for state representative, District 41, which is Cleveland County and Stone County. And we actually have 3 schools that are on the chopping block right now. That would be Shirley, Concord, and Westside, for various different reasons. Shirley is an F school, for example. Over 50% of the population is impoverished, the students, and approximately half are technically homeless. And there's some that's technical language in education, and that means various different things. So my thought is, why would my representative, who I am running against, why would he vote to support LEARNS knowing that he's going to lose 3 schools? Every one of these schools know that they're subject to closure. I have a lot of thoughts about that. I also have 2 grandchildren who go to Pulaski Academy. My oldest son can afford to send them there. He's a medical doctor, and it's $17,600. And he says, look, I'll take the $6,600 from the state, but I'm still going to have to pay $9,300. I have good information, reliable information, that the PA is not planning on increasing their school enrollment, but magically, inside of 3 weeks, 150 plus students qualified as suddenly being disabled. They were diagnosed with ADHD. I asked my medical son doctor about that. He said, that raises the eye of suspicion right there alone. Nobody gets that many diagnoses in 3 weeks. So there's a game that's being played here. And it's not benefiting F students at all, or students coming from S schools, I should say, at all. I mean, it's all ruse. It's all, I think, designed to destroy our public education system, personally. Is how I'm looking at that. So I've thrown a lot at you. I'm going to stop there, but I do mean that. You need to run for our governor.
I'm going to very quickly respond. I did not include that in my talking points because I had heard it as a rumor about basically forum shopping for doctors to be able to get a diagnosis that would qualify a student as, right now, let me clarify. Under the LEARNS Act, there is a 3-year rollout of the vouchers. And the first year, the only people who are eligible for the vouchers are students with certain disabilities, students in foster care, incoming kindergartners, all of that. So what we have seen is suddenly, and I mean, I did not have firsthand knowledge, you're the one who provided that. I had heard rumors about students, large percentages of students at certain schools suddenly getting diagnoses for things that would qualify their family to then receive the vouchers. Yes.
Ally, can you educate me, maybe the others, what are the standards that are going to be required of the private schools? I mean, if you're a public school, you know, the Department of Education, there are certain testing requirements, certain penalties and ramifications. What is in place for private schools, charter schools, religious schools to ensure that the students are going to be meeting some standards?
Because you think there should be, right? Like, that makes sense. But if we're going to be funding it, yeah.
Public, our students want that.
Yes. So in the committee hearings, when this bill was being debated, it was stressed that these schools would be held accountable, they would be monitored, and the students' test scores and all of those things. Right now, we are in a process, in administrative law, there's a rule-making process. We're going through that, so this is not finalized and could change, but they did get emergency rules passed so they could go ahead and implement it. And I believe under those emergency rules, the private schools get to choose whatever test they want to identify to be the test that they give their students. It's not necessarily going to be the same one that we have to give our students, so it's going to be hard to compare. The other kind of points I will make, one is there's a provision in the law that says any student who is not performing well academically will lose his or her voucher. I want you to think about that. What does that mean in terms of who the private schools will end up having to serve? If there's any student that is struggling, that student will be sent back to public school essentially, and the public school will be we will be graded in terms of test scores on how those students perform, and we will be the ones responsible for helping that student improve. The other thing to keep in mind is we have already seen this in the charter school context, where the accountability component is just not there, where failing charter schools with D and F grades are routinely reapproved to continue to operate. So I don't have a lot of faith that it's going to be very rigorous. The other thing we've seen in the charter school realm that we are going to see here is the fly-by-night pop-up schools that are there just to collect the money and will not last and will not stay. So under this program, the schools have a few years. They can accept the vouchers, they can become an approved vendor, they can accept students, and they have a few years to become accredited private schools and to do all of that. What we will see is what we have seen in charter schools, where they pop up, they enroll a bunch of kids, they get the voucher money or the state money, and within a year, 2 years, they close their doors, and those students come back to the public school system, and they are a year or two behind, and we are suddenly tasked with trying to clean up the mess. Yes.
Okay, one question. I have been reading about parents' rights movement in Florida. Recently, someone complained that it was a violation of their prohibition on diversity and inclusion and critical race theory in Florida when the parents saw a poster of different colors of hands in a classroom. Where are we on parents' rights here? Is there anything about that in the Learns Act, and what do you see on the horizon for that? I know that Moms for Liberty is really behind that, and they are active here.
So there is this thing that's floating out there that you can Google called the Parents' Bill of Rights that has been pushed in several states and is being pushed at the national level. There are components of that that are wrapped up in the Learns Act. I mean, when we talk about indoctrination and CRT and, you know, not being able to call students by their preferred gender pronouns and things like that, all of that is related to the same thing you were talking about. I don't believe, and I could be wrong on this, but I don't believe Arkansas has actually passed the quote-unquote Parents' Bill of Rights as the formal, you know, document that exists elsewhere. But we are definitely on track in terms of a lot of the same components. And, you know, over and over and over again, we have seen this be used in other states, and so far in Arkansas, for, you know, one or two parents to end up censoring what is available for all of the students. That is really how it is set up to work, is anything objectionable to anyone can be removed for everyone. And, you know, I won't hide the ball. I think that is a terrible way to educate students to, you know, operate in the world where we are training students to be independent thinkers that can function and contribute to society. And I have young kids. I understand the urge and the impulse to shield them from difficult topics and content. I fully understand that, but that does not serve them well. And that, we have to overcome somewhat that protective urge to be able to do what is actually right for them. And that's, it's hard as a parent, it's hard as an educator, it's hard as a public policy maker, but you can't lean too far into the protective urge because it really does harm the outcomes.
So I hesitate to say anything. So my experience with Marvel Elaine, as a young theologian, just graduating, my first church in Arkansas was in Marvel. And I dared to put my children in the public school system instead of Marvel Academy. Wealthy cotton farmers came to me and said, hey, you're the pastor of First Baptist Church. We think your children ought to be at Marvel Academy, and we will pay for it because it's probably a money issue. And I said, I'm sorry, but my children will get a better education in the public education system. That was strike one. Okay, there were other things that I did in the community as a pastor to try to challenge those racial lines, and several times got called on the carpet. So the whole time that Learns is going down, I'm thinking, I know Marvel Elaine, I know they're a very weak school system because there's this divide. Marvel Academy was started by the White Citizens Council post-Brown decision, for those of you who may not be aware of that. And so only white kids, so to my knowledge, go to Marvel Academy. So that's the reason why the public school system was weak to begin with. It's not because they have bad teachers or our public education system is failing, but you have this real dynamic at work and at play that has been corrosive, and consequently, you develop these hothouse people. Now, what I mean by that is their children really don't know how to deal with racial diversity. They don't know how to deal with diversity in the community, and that's the context of the Phillips County area down there. So, I wondered though, did Marvel Academy, in all of your litigation and everything, did any of that come up, the dynamic? Because I'm thinking, Arkansans don't understand this history, this dynamic. They don't understand what's going on with Marvel Elaine. I knew it. I lived it. I'm kind of dating myself, and that's why I kind of hesitate to mention. But I was there, and I know what is going on down there.
So I'm going to tell you a very quick story. This is so entertaining to me. It doesn't matter legally at all. But we filed this lawsuit, and the state immediately rolled out false talking points that the transformation contract was the only thing saving Marvel Elaine School District from consolidation and closure. I will tell you legally that is completely untrue. Transformation contracts are from a provisional law that talks about failing school districts can avoid consequences such as state takeover. The consolidation part is from a different part of the code that says if you drop below these numbers, here they're just separate, okay? But they rolled out this, essentially the scare tactic and attack to get the people in the community to turn against the group of families that had filed the lawsuit and had said, you're gonna cause our district to close, you are gonna, this is gonna be such a problem. And there was an editorial published in the local Helena World or something, the nearby paper, where someone wrote an editorial as a teacher and said, I was there the day that the state came in and they announced this transformation contract and it was going to save the district, and all of my students cheered and cried because they were so happy that it was going to save the district. That teacher teaches at Marvel Academy, not Marvel School District. It was not revealed in there that this teacher did not have students in the district. It was a totally different school. Yes, so sometimes I have gotten so deep into this that the stories I tell and the things that I have, been a part of seem like conspiracy theories. Like, it seems like that cannot be real. But, that's a good example, is that was published in the newspaper as a teacher whose children cried and cheered that the state was saving their district. And he teaches at the all-white Marvel Academy and not the majority black Marvel Elaine School District. Yes.
Does Marble Lane School District accept vouchers and move over to Marble Academy?
Marble Academy would have to accept them because they still get to
Right.
decide who to accept or
But
not.
wouldn't that be discrimination if they refused?
So, I mean, yes, this has been part of the discussion for a long time has been how do you challenge these things? There are so many things that are harmful in the LARNS Act, and what are the potential legal challenges that could be raised? And in fact, there's a lot of talk, and I was a part of it, about, under Lakeview, isn't this unconstitutional? It creates a two-tiered, unequal, inequitable, school system, discrimination in admissions, all of these things. My personal take as a lawyer, and there are other lawyers who disagree, I think you need evidence before you go to court to try to prove that. And if there are examples like that, then that may help prove something. But there's also a group of people that want to go fast and, use evidence from other states and be able to show, with the expert opinion, expert testimony, that this is what these things cause. My take, knowing Arkansas, is that you got to cross your T's and dot your I's and be really sure and have enough evidence to just hit them over the head with it. The other part, legally, that we got to talk about is the makeup of the Arkansas Supreme Court, which is the fact that Lakeview is a Supreme Court decision that could be overturned by the Supreme Court. Lakeview is the case that said the Arkansas Constitution requires the state to create and fund and guarantee adequate and equitable public education. I mean, I'm not telling y'all anything you don't already know when I say that that is not super popular with the supermajority of the Capitol right now. And I think that you would really have to weigh the risks of making a challenge that could open up Lakeview to potentially being overturned or narrowed or something like that. So it is tricky. I mean, it's a tricky thing to navigate how to handle in terms of legal challenges.
I would just encourage people to become involved, and you can be here and get mad, but for instance, tomorrow, Monday, at 5 o'clock in Benton for the Swain County Quorum Court, they're having a meeting, and my understanding, the purpose of the meeting is to fire the librarian and the staff there because of the, X-rated books in the libraries. That's a whole other issue, but it's out there. And then also to say, Bettina and I are here with Progressive Arkansas Women PAC, and we started in 2016 raising money to support women to run for office, progressive women. And so there are places like that where you can help with your money, and then we give that money to candidates to run. It's really, really hard, especially for women, to ask for money. And then people like Tom, it's hard to ask for money when you're running for an office, but it takes money. And when we first started being a PAC, we went, ugh, PAC? But it's got to be done in order to fight against this. So if you've never contributed to a campaign before, you need to start doing it. Find some good candidates and help them.
We give you money, Alex.
Yes,
Yeah.
And there's a great woman running for my seat right now that I hope will,
Yes.
Anna Strong.
What are you doing?
I'm going to sue the state a whole lot. That's the short answer. Is I'm going to sue the state over all of this. I can't really reveal more than that right now, but that's what I want to do. I will speak to that a little bit. I don't shy away from a fight, and I don't want to imply that being on the school board was too hard or anything like that. But I will say it is a different skill set when you are trying to meet the valid and real needs of so many people in your community with so many restrictions and constraints on what you are able to do. And, it is very hard to look at someone in the face and say, your concern is right and it is valid, and I am having a really hard time fixing it. And that is a constant struggle when you are in a public school district. I know myself and I know my personality. I am much more confident and at ease in the position where I am taking on someone that I strongly and vehemently disagree with. Some of these things, like the lawsuits related to censorship of library materials or, public education, those sorts of things. And so that is part of it and why I, think I can serve a little bit better in, frankly, a more aggressive role taking on the state in that way. But, yeah, it was there.
Getting back to your talk, you mentioned that there was, that schools had to provide credit for students who wanted to take classes that were not provided at the school. Is there any limit on that? For example, did it have to be an accredited class, or could, say, a student wanted to take a Bible studies class at its fundamentalist church?
Don't give them any ideas, please. Yeah, so I think so. I think it has to be an approved vendor. Like a lot of this, in terms of the vouchers, the course choice program, they just generally put in the law something like an approved vendor, and then we're going through the rule-making process to see what that is actually going to mean. What do you actually have to do to be approved? How rigorous is that process going to be? And in terms of what kind of class, I don't know the answer to that. Whether it would have to be, until this AP African American Studies debacle, came up, it wasn't at the forefront to me, is this something that counts for graduation credit, for example? But we have a list of courses that are approved for graduation credit in Arkansas. That's what AP African American History was removed from. I would hope that only those courses would be the ones that could be offered. I don't have a lot of confidence that's where they're going to go with it, though. All right. I'm going to thank you. I'm going to take a point of parental privilege and ask my son, Brady Noland, to come up here for a moment. Will you come up here, please, buddy? Birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Brady. Happy birthday to you.
Thank you.
That really, it really felt like, we were participating in democracy in today's meeting. And, this is step one. There's a lot of other steps, folks. There's a lot of other steps, and you can summarize it by saying getting involved, but it involves voting, volunteering, donating, contacting people, networking, joining. It involves all those things, and so we've got Allie fighting the good fight, but we've got there's people out there fighting the good fight that need help, and what they need is grassroots, and that's you, by the way. You are the roots, and that's where change is going to come from, because you can run into all kinds of barriers in the legal and judicial systems and eventually the legislature. But grassroots is what's going to move things from here on. Well.
5 o'clock tomorrow in Main Street in Benton. All you have to
Yes.
do is be there watching.
Main Street Benton.
It's so.
Do y'all know what X-rated books they're actually talking about? They're like children's picture books that are, sorry, I didn't mean to hijack that, but it is crazy. They're children's picture books where things like 2 worms get married and they can't tell if the worms are gay. I'm not kidding. Those are the quote-unquote X-rated books that they're upset about. Just watching.
Another way to get involved and get to meet up with your friends in the process is to attend an event. You can download the meetup.com app on your phone and look up the Arkansas Society of Freethinkers and have an up-to-date list all the time of what's going on, where it's going on, what time it is, who our featured speaker is, or what the activity is. We have this meetup every month, and then we also have restaurant meetups and a Zoom call, and we've even got opportunities if you want to get into disc golf. We've got Pint Night tomorrow at the Flying Saucer at 7 p.m. There is a secular substance abuse recovery meetup on the calendar that if you or anyone you know could benefit from that, please check it out. And on Monday the 28th, we've got Zoom night, and First Tuesday is our get-together at the American Pie Pizza in North Little Rock, and that is on the first Tuesday of every month, so that'd be September 5th. We'd love to see you come out. We'd love to see you join ASF at the table over there. Word is that you get as many cookies as you can eat if you join ASF. I might have made that up, I don't know. And if you'd like to volunteer or be considered as a speaker, please just give us a shout. And I really appreciate everyone being here. Thank you very much, and good afternoon.
If you'd like to know more about the Arkansas Society of Freethinkers, check us out online at arfreethinkers.org. You can also find us on Meetup, Facebook, and on YouTube. At Arkansas Society of Freethinkers, people are accepted as human beings and are never threatened with eternal damnation. In a nutshell, a freethinker believes there are no imaginary gods whose dogma is sent to control the human race. Rather, we are all human beings responsible for our own actions and our own future. Check us out at any of the following online locations. Send us an email and let's talk. Or go to Meetup and join us at any of our regularly scheduled events. Let's get together and hope to see you soon.